I need to check the list of used names first, then write the story. The names to avoid are all listed in the file. Let me write a story with completely new names. The day my wife's lawyer called, I was standing in the garage trying to figure out why the lawnmower wouldn't start. That's the thing nobody tells you about grief. It doesn't pause for the mundane. The grass still grows, the mail still comes, and apparently attorneys still call at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning to tell you that your wife of 31 years had a storage unit you never knew existed. Her name was Judith. She died 11 days earlier, a brain aneurysm, fast and without warning. She was making coffee. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was already gone. The doctors told me she likely didn't feel any pain. I've been trying to decide whether that's comforting or not ever since. We had a good marriage. I want to say that clearly because everything that comes after might make you think otherwise. We had a good marriage. We laughed at the same things. We argued about the thermostat and whose turn it was to call the insurance company. She made the best roast chicken I've ever eaten in my life, and she knew it, and she was just a little smug about it. I loved her. I still do. What I discovered didn't change that. It just complicated it. The attorney's name was Dennis Folwell. He'd handled Judith's business affairs for about 15 years, though I only met him twice, once at a firm holiday party, once at a mutual friend's retirement dinner. I remember thinking he had the handshake of someone who had practiced it. When he called that Tuesday, he was careful with his words. Measured. He said Judith had left specific instructions. There was a storage unit in her name, located in Glendale, about 22 miles from our house. She had paid 3 years of fees in advance. The unit contained items she wanted me to have access to, but only after her passing. I asked him to repeat that. He did. I stood in my garage with the dead lawnmower and asked him what was in the unit. He said he didn't know. He said Judith had handled that entirely on her own. He was simply the one she'd told, and he was simply doing what she'd asked. I drove out to Glendale 2 days later. I almost didn't go. My daughter, Petra, offered to come with me. She's 28, practical, more emotionally organized than I'll ever be. I told her I needed to go alone. I don't fully know why. Maybe because whatever was inside that unit felt like it belonged first to me and Judith, like a conversation that had been waiting. The facility was on a commercial strip between a tire shop and a Vietnamese restaurant. Not glamorous. I remember the smell, that particular combination of dust and rubber and recycled air that all storage places seem to share. The manager walked me to Unit 114. The lock opened with a key Dennis had mailed me in a small padded envelope. The door rolled up. I don't know what I was expecting. Something dramatic, maybe. A room full of secrets stacked to the ceiling. What I found was a folding chair, a plastic bin, and a cardboard box sealed with packing tape. There was a note taped to the bin. Judith's handwriting, tight, slightly left-leaning, the way she always wrote. It said, "For Gordon. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to say this while I was standing in front of you." I sat down in the folding chair. I sat there for a while before I opened anything. The bin held documents, financial records mostly. A savings account I hadn't known about, not enormous, about $43,000, and what appeared to be records of transfers made over roughly 16 years. Small amounts, 200 here, 350 there, the kind of amounts that wouldn't raise questions on a joint bank statement because she ran most of our household finances and I trusted her entirely. I'm not saying that with bitterness. I trusted her because she had never given me a reason not to. That's just the truth. The cardboard box held something harder. Inside was a photograph. A young woman, early to mid-20s, I guessed, standing in front of what looked like an apartment building. She was smiling. She had Judith's nose. Judith's particular way of tilting her head when she smiled. I recognized it, the way you recognize a song from 3 notes. Underneath the photograph was a letter. Judith's handwriting, 7 pages, dated 14 months before she died. I read it sitting in that storage unit with the door half open and the sound of traffic filtering in from the road outside. Her name was Molly. She was 26 years old, before Judith met me, before our first date, before our first conversation. In fact, Judith had been in a serious relationship with a man named Christopher. They were together for almost 4 years, and in the final year of that relationship, she became pregnant. Christopher, according to Judith's letter, was not a good man. She chose those words carefully, the way she chose all her words. Not a good man. She elaborated across 2 full pages. He had a temper that had cost him 2 jobs. He had a way of making her feel like every problem was her fault. She had stayed longer than she should have because she was 22 and she thought that was what love was supposed to feel like. When she told him about the pregnancy, he told her it wasn't his. She knew, reading her account of that conversation across a gap of more than 2 decades, that she had made her decision in that moment. She would not raise a child inside that dynamic. She would not raise a child inside that dynamic. She would not let him have access to one. She gave Molly up for adoption when she was 4 days old. She met me 7 months later. She never told me. I want to be precise about how I felt reading that, because I think it matters. I wasn't angry, not immediately. What I felt first was something closer to vertigo. The sensation that the floor of a room you've lived in for 30 years has turned out to be a different material than you always thought. I knew where the furniture was. I knew where the furniture was. I knew which boards creaked, and then you find out the floor itself wasn't what you believed. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the box, and drove home. I didn't tell Petra right away. I told myself I needed to understand it first. The truth is I didn't know how to say it out loud. I was 61 years old and I had just found out that my wife had a daughter I had never known about, which meant I had a stepdaughter I had never known about, which meant there was a 26-year-old woman out there somewhere who might or not know that her biological mother had just died. That last thought was the one that moved me out of my chair. Judith's letter explained the savings account. The 16 years of small transfers. She had hired a private investigator when Molly was 10. Just to know she was safe, she wrote. Not to interfere. And she had followed Molly's life from a careful distance ever since. She knew where Molly had gone to college. She knew she'd studied environmental science at the University of Oregon. She knew she was living in Portland, working for a non-profit. She knew she'd gotten married 3 years ago. She knew the name of Molly's husband. She had never made contact. She didn't know if Molly even knew she was adopted. The letter ended with a question that Judith had no way of asking me while she was alive. Will you find her? Not for me. I don't deserve that. But she might want to know where she came from, and she might want to know that someone thought about her every day. I called Dennis the next morning. I asked him whether Judith had ever mentioned Molly by name or given him any instructions about what I should do with the information. He said no. Judith had told him only that the unit contained personal documents and that I should have access to them. The rest was up to me. I spent 3 weeks doing nothing. I want to be honest about that. I went back to work. I'm a semi-retired civil engineer. I still consult part-time, and I mowed the lawn with the eventually repaired mower, and I ate dinners that my neighbor Rose kept bringing over in glass containers, and I thought about Molly every single day and did nothing about it. Petra found out because she found the letter. I hadn't hidden it, not deliberately. It was on the desk in my home office. She came over one afternoon to help me sort through some of Judith's things, and she found it, and she read it, and then she came and sat down across from me at the kitchen table with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. "Dad," she said, "how long have you known about this?" I told her. She was quiet for a long time. What she said next surprised me. I had been expecting something harder. Confusion, maybe some hurt on behalf of her mother, maybe some hurt on her own behalf, at the idea of a sibling who had existed without her knowledge. What she said was, "We have to find her. She needs to know Mom died." That was my daughter. I'm proud of her every day. We found Molly through a combination of the information in Judith's letter and, more directly, through a DNA ancestry service. I had my results from one of those kits already. Petra had given it to me for my birthday 2 years earlier. We created an account for Judith's DNA using a sample Petra found on a preserved item, which I'm told some grief counselors think is a strange thing to do and some think is entirely understandable. Molly was already in the database. The match came back in 11 days. Her profile name was just her initials. We sent a message through the platform. It took me 4 drafts. The final version said that I had been married to someone who I believed was her biological mother, that I had learned this recently, and that she had passed away earlier this year. I said I wasn't reaching out to complicate her life or make any claims. I said I thought she deserved to know. I left my phone number. She called on a Sunday afternoon. I was not prepared for her voice. It sounded like Judith's voice in a way I couldn't have anticipated. Not identical, but the same rhythm, the same slight pause before she chose a word. It took everything I had to keep my voice steady. She told me she had always known she was adopted. Her parents, the people who raised her, a couple in Bend, Oregon, who she called Mom and Dad without hesitation and clearly meant it, had told her from the time she was small. She had thought about searching for her biological family at various points and had always stepped back. She said she wasn't sure she was ready for it to be real. She asked me what Judith was like. I told her. I talked for probably 40 minutes. I told her about the roast chicken and the thermostat arguments, and the way Judith organized her bookshelves by color in the living room, even though it drove me insane because I couldn't find anything. I told her that Judith was the most privately loyal person I had ever known, that she was not effusive, not demonstrative, but that she showed up consistently and without being asked for every person she loved. I told her that Judith had thought about her every single day. Molly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She never tried to contact me." "No," I said. "She was afraid it wasn't her right." Another silence. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," she said. I agreed with her. We met in person 6 weeks later. She drove down from Portland. I made coffee. Petra came. Molly brought her husband, a quiet, kind man named Joel, who seemed to understand that his job that day was mostly to be present, without requiring anything. What I remember most about that afternoon is not the big moments. I remember that Molly sat at our kitchen table in the same chair Judith always sat in, and neither of them knew that was where Judith sat, and I watched it happen and couldn't speak for a moment. I remember that Petra showed her photographs, laying them out on the table one at a time, narrating each one. I remember that at a certain point Molly touched one of the photos, a picture of Judith at maybe 35 at a family barbecue squinting in the sun, and said very quietly, "She looks kind." She was. She was one of the kindest people I knew. She just couldn't figure out how to be brave about this particular thing. We talked about Christopher. I had been prepared for that to be a harder conversation. Molly already knew enough about her background, from records she'd accessed as an adult, to know the broad outlines. She didn't ask me to fill in details I wasn't comfortable with. She said only that she had made peace with not having a relationship with her biological father a long time ago. She said her dad in Bend had taught her to fish and drove 4 hours to every one of her college soccer games, and that was her father, full stop. I respected that. I still do. Before she left, Molly asked me what I planned to do with the savings account. I told her that was straightforward. It was hers. Judith had clearly been building it for her, even if she'd never figured out how to deliver it. Molly shook her head and started to say something, and I held up a hand. "It's not mine," I said. "It never was. She built it for you. You take it." Molly looked at me for a long moment with Judith's eyes and her own expression, and then she nodded. "She calls about once a month now, sometimes more. We talk about ordinary things. Her work, my consulting projects, a podcast we apparently both listened to without having known it. Last month, she told me her mother in Bend had started asking about me, wanting to know what I was like. Molly said she'd told her I was a good man who made terrible coffee and clearly needed someone to sort out his kitchen. That made me laugh harder than I had laughed in months. Petra and Molly have been texting since approximately 48 hours after they met. I stopped trying to keep up with what they talk about. I think they're better at this than I am. There is something I think about sometimes, when it's quiet. I think about Judith in that storage unit, setting up the folding chair, paying 3 years of fees in advance because she wanted to be sure it would still be there, writing 7 pages by hand because she was the kind of person who said things better when she wrote them than when she spoke. She built a whole architecture of eventually. Someday I'll tell him. Someday when the time is right. And the time never felt right. And then there was no more time. I didn't say this to condemn her. I say it because I think it's the most human thing about her. And I loved her human parts as much as the rest. Fear makes people build elaborate systems to delay the thing that frightens them. I understand that now in a way I didn't before. What I wish is that she had known she didn't have to be afraid of me. I would have stood next to her, whatever it took. However complicated. I would have stood next to her. That's the thing I can't give her now. The knowledge that I would have chosen her anyway. All I can do is try to be. For the daughter she spent 26 years loving quietly from a distance, the kind of presence she deserved to have. I think that's what she was asking me, in those 7 pages in the storage unit. I think that was the whole request. I'm trying to be worthy of it. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that afternoon in the storage unit. Not in any cosmic sense. I'm not that kind of man. But in the plain, practical sense that every choice a person makes creates the next set of choices available to them. Judith made a choice at 22 that shaped everything that followed. Not because she was weak, but because she was frightened, and frightened people make decisions inside the walls of whatever feels safest at the time. I understand that now in a way I couldn't have before all of this. What I keep coming back to is the intelligence it required to carry that quietly for 31 years. Not the secrecy. I don't mean that as a compliment to the hiding. I mean the emotional discipline it took to love Molly from a distance. To build that savings account in small, careful amounts. To write 7 pages by hand because she knew she owed it to me in full sentences, not fragments. That was its own kind of courage. Even if it wasn't the kind that actually helped anyone while she was still here. Courage has a timing problem sometimes. It arrives just slightly too late. The thing I've learned, and I say learned because 61 years old is apparently not too late to learn things that should be obvious, is that the truth doesn't get lighter the longer you carry it. It gets heavier. Judith carried this for 3 decades, and I think it cost her something every single year. Not in a dramatic way. In the way that a small, persistent weight changes your posture over time. You adjust to it. You stop noticing. But the weight is still there, and your back knows. What I want for Petra, for Molly, for anyone who hears this and recognizes something of themselves in it, is the willingness to say the hard thing before it becomes a storage unit full of documents and apologies in a padded envelope. That's not a criticism of Judith. It's just the lesson her life handed me. The truth told badly, at the wrong moment, in the wrong words, is still better than the truth told never. Because told never means the other person never gets to say, I would have chosen you anyway. I would have chosen her anyway. She never got to know that. That's the only part I can't make peace with. What I can do, what I've tried to do since that Sunday afternoon when Molly called and I heard Judith's rhythm in her voice, is show up without conditions. For Molly, who didn't ask for any of this. For Petra, who handled it with more grace than I did. For the version of Judith that existed before fear got in the way. That's the only thing I know to do with a story like this. You take what you were handed, and you try to make something decent out of it.